Well, so if you've been following the tutorial to this point, you should have a nice quilt block ready to go. You should have an identically sized piece of background fabric. You should have made a couple of straps, and you should have some lining fabric handy. With all those things in place, we'll go ahead and make a tote bag. Well, here I've sewn together the front and back of my tote bag. I've sewn along the two side edges and the bottom edge, and, since it's a tote, I left the top edge open. Notice that the 2-inch strip of fabric is at the top edge of the tote and the 3.5-inch strip of fabric's at the bottom edge. What I'm doing here is I'm marking a 1.5-inch square at the bottom corner of the tote, and I'm doing this on both sides. I'll carefully cut these squares out. And here you can see what that looks like when they're both done. This is also a good moment to head to the ironing board and press the 3 seam allowances open. And these cutouts actually make it a little easier to do that. And now I can just pinch apart the layers of fabric and open the tote up at the corner. Here's a closer view of what that's going to look like. I just want to match up the 2 seams then, and then I'll go ahead and pin the corner flat like this. Head over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew across this corner, once with a 1/4-inch seam allowance, and then a second time within that seam allowance for sturdiness. See, now I can take this little seam, and when I turn it right side out, the bottom of my tote has these beautiful square corners to it. Okay, so I have my straps here and I want to add them to the tote at this point. The first step in that is to measure and figure out where the center of the front panel of my tote is. I'm going to go ahead and put a pin just through the top layer of fabric at that point, and then I'll flip the tote over and do the exact same thing on the other side. I'll stick a pin at the center point of the back panel. Now when I pin the straps to the tote, what I want to do is match the raw edge of the strap with the raw edge of the top edge of the tote. And I need to figure out about how far apart my straps need to be. I typically use a measurement of 3.5 inches because I just like a great big opening to put my arm through. So I'm measuring 3.5 inches from the pin to the inside edge of the strap and sticking a pin there, and then I'll do the exact same measurement on the other side. I like to pin my straps twice just for extra security. Now I've got a strap pinned to the back. I'll do the exact same process on the front. And then I'll head to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to tack these in place with a little bit less than a 1/4-inch seam allowance. We'll sew them in more securely in a later step. So I have 2 pieces of lining fabric cut here, and they're the same size as the front and back panel of the tote that I just finished making. And I like a tote with pockets, so here's my easy method. I first figure out what size I want my pocket to be, and then I cut a piece of fabric that's twice the height. And what that allows me to do then is to fold this in half with the right sides to the inside, and then I sew it. I sew along the 2 side edges, and I sew a little way across the bottom, leaving me a little opening. I'll just cut away the corners because I'm going to turn this right side out in a second, and those clipped corners will give me nice precise corners when they're turned. Once I have it all turned to the outside, I just give it a nice pressing, and there's a double line pocket that I'm all ready to sew on. I just figure out where I want it on the lining panel, and I do a little measuring to make sure that it's centered side to side, and then I'll pin it in place. So notice you've got the nice complete fold at the top edge of the pocket, and down here at the bottom edge is where that opening was. Where I turned it, we'll just sew straight across that to seal it off. Now I like a tote bag with plenty of pockets in it, so I've made 2 of them, and I'm going to go ahead and pin a second one to the other piece of lining fabric that I have ready. You can really do as many or as few pockets for this tote as you want, by the way. Over at the sewing machine, I'm going to sew them down to the liner along the side edges and the bottom edge. And then I'm going to put my 2 liner pieces together with right sides facing. I'm going to sew them along the side and along the bottom as well. So again, that top is open, and here's where my pocket's sewn on, and of course you notice that the pocket edges open toward the top of the tote. So far so good? Okay, now I just finished this off exactly the same way that I finished off the tote. We're going to make those little square corners just like we did before. All right, so I have a finished tote with some straps attached to it. I've got a finished liner with some pockets attached to it. And now we're going to put these two things together. First step of that is to turn my tote so it's wrong side out again. And then I'll want to stick the straps down inside, and I want to shake the bag so they kind of fall to the bottom. Then I'm going to leave my liner with the right side facing out. And then I'm just going to take it just like that and slide it inside the bag. You want to match up those bottom corners as best you can. And this may seem weird, so let me just point this little thing out. All we're really doing here is we're getting the right side of the tote bag to the right side of the lining so that we can sew them together. So I'm going to start pinning these together at the side seams here. So I'll match the seams up, match the raw edges and insert a pin. And then I'll go to the opposite side and I'll do the same thing, match the side seams there and put in a pin. Now I want to pin at my strap points. So each place that a strap is sewn to the tote, I'll just make sure it's lying flat and I'll place a pin there. And I'll do this at all 4 strap points. We want to pin, but we also want to make sure they're nice and flat. And then from here, it's just a matter of lining up those 2 raw edges, the liner and the tote itself, and just pinning them at regular intervals all the way around. Now here's the back of the tote, and I'm not going to sew all the way along this edge. I actually need to leave a little opening. So here's a blue pin to show me where I'm going to start sewing. I'm going to leave an opening to the left of it there. So I come over to my sewing machine. I make sure I start sewing at that blue pin location. And I'm just going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around this top edge of the bag so I can join the liner to the bag. Any point that you're sewing up to where a strap is, take a minute, feel around and make sure that strap's nice and smooth inside the layers there, and then sew over it. And then when you get to a point when you're roughly 3 inches away from where you started sewing, go ahead and stop, and we'll come back over to the ironing board. We'll press that seam allowance open, and then here on the back is the opening. We're going to use this to turn the entire tote right side out. So don't force this too hard. The whole thing will come through the opening. It's just going to take a little pushing and pulling. But once you get most of it pulled through, it'll start looking a whole lot more like a tote bag. Let's get our straps oriented here. We need to have one of them on each side. There's the opening where we turned it. Pretty nice. Now we'll take that liner, we'll shove it right back inside the tote bag again. We'll match up the bottoms, and then here at the top we have this nice edge, and we're going to press that nice and crisp together. Once we've pressed it, then we'll sew just 1/8 of an inch from that edge to give the top of the tote a nice finish and also close off that opening in the back. And that is that.